It was late night in Los Angeles. The studio lights had finally dimmed, leaving Snoop Dogg alone with the echoes of the last track he recorded. The neon glow from the street lamp outside cast jagged shadows across the asphalt. The city was quiet, but Snoop felt restless. He climbed into his black SUV, music still pulsing softly from the car's speakers as he made his way home. Each note from the speakers mingled with the distant sound of tires on wet pavement. The night air was warm, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and palm trees. Snoop rolled down his tinted window to feel the breeze against his face. The air smelled of rain approaching. He flicked ash from his cigar into the gutter as he eased onto the road. The memory of the song he had just laid down buzzed in his mind, a triumphant final verse about victory and legacy. Yet tonight, underneath those triumphant chords, Snoop felt an unsettling chill. He realized he was driving through unfamiliar, dimly lit streets, far from the usual safe route. At a quiet intersection, the world seemed to hold its breath. A flicker of red light on the crosswalk turned to green, and Snoop pressed down on the gas. A black sedan rolled in beside him. Inside, 3 shadowy figures in hooded jackets glanced over. Snoop's instincts screamed alert, but before he could react, a flash of metal caught the streetlight. 3 shots rang out in deafening bursts. Glass shattered. A searing pain exploded in Snoop's right leg. His SUV jerked as the engine sputtered, heart pounding like tribal drums. He hit the horn. The world around him slowed. The street lamp's neon glow twisted and smeared as he felt warmth spreading across his thigh. Blood blossomed warm and sticky on the upholstery. Snoop Dogg clenched the steering wheel with trembling hands. Through the fog of shock he saw the figures leap back into the black sedan. One of them, voice cold and vicious, spat out a hateful curse. He couldn't quite make out the slur, but its venom was unmistakable. Snoop felt a cold dread. He realized they had shot him not for his music or his fame, but for the color of his skin. The stolen silence of the night was broken by Snoop's cry of pain. Ignoring sirens yet to come, he slammed on the brakes and unbuckled his seatbelt. Dazed, he slipped out of the SUV and onto the asphalt. His body was trembling uncontrollably. Warm blood seeped through his jeans. Fear coursed through his veins faster than the spreading crimson stain. Footsteps thundered on the pavement, and within moments a crowd gathered. Someone shouted into a cell phone, voice urgent. In the chaos, Snoop tried to crawl away from the broken SUV, his fingers dragging in the gritty tar. Each movement shot pain through him, but adrenaline pushed him onward. He tasted copper on his tongue and grit of road under his nails. The world around him blurred, distant neon signs, people's horrified faces, the flashing lights of an approaching ambulance. Snoop closed his eyes as sirens wailed and his skin turned cold. The scent of antiseptic swirled in his dizzy awareness. When he opened his eyes again, sterile white lights hung above. He felt a dull ache throbbing in his leg. A nurse patted his forehead and squeezed his hand gently. Shadows of conversation drifted through the curtain on the edge of his vision, the doctor's voices mixing with his fevered thoughts. He remembered the shooting with fragmented clarity, the gunfire, the blood, the hateful voice. Another memory sprang into focus, a symbol stitched on the assailants' jackets. It was a black veil crossed with a dagger, the signature of the infamous Black Veil Clan. Panic twisted in his gut. It wasn't an accident, he realized. This attack was deliberate. Someone had tried to silence the legend himself. Fear coiled deeper inside him as he processed the realization. Outside, flashing news cameras and whispered rumors circled like vultures. The sterile hospital room felt too quiet now. Snoop Dogg lay there, bandaged and vulnerable, the weight of the night's violence pressing down on him. The first chapter of this nightmare had ended with one thought burning in his mind: he was not safe, and the hunt had only just begun. The hospital was a cage of light. Its sterile walls pulsed with a silence that was anything but peaceful. Snoop Dogg lay still, pain radiating like fire through his thigh. The bandages were tight, clean, but they couldn't stop the memories, the gunshots, the blood, the voice that dripped with venom. He hadn't spoken much since the incident. The nurses whispered about PTSD. The detectives had questions, but he gave them little, not because he didn't remember, but because he remembered too much. A knock broke the silence. The door creaked open, and a man in a black suit stepped in. No badge, no stethoscope, just dark eyes and a quiet menace. "Snoop," he said, his voice smooth as poison. "You were lucky." Snoop narrowed his eyes. "Who sent you?" The man smiled without warmth. "I represent people who think it's time to stop pretending this was random." There it was. Confirmation. "You know the Black Veil, don't you?" the man asked. His words were slow, deliberate. "They don't just hate, they organize, they watch, they plan, and they've been watching you for a long time." A flash of memory burned in Snoop's mind. One of the attackers wore a ring with the veil and dagger insignia. They see black excellence as a threat. The man continued, You're more than a threat. You're a symbol. That's why they targeted you. Snoop sat up straighter despite the pain. So what now? They failed. For now, the man said, but failure fuels them. They'll come again. He leaned in, lowering his voice. And next time, they won't miss your leg. The man stood and walked out, leaving the room colder than before. Later that night, Snoop stared out the hospital window. The city glimmered beneath him, vast and indifferent. But somewhere down there, in those winding streets and alleyways, was a network of hate wearing suits and masks. A network that had decided he was the enemy. He picked up his phone with a shaky hand and called his cousin, D-Lock. We need to talk, Snoop said. Now, and don't come alone. An hour later, D-Lock arrived with two others, tight-knit brothers from their old block. They stood in a quiet semicircle around the bed. They tried to kill me, Snoop said, and it wasn't no random hit. He explained everything, what he saw, what he heard, what the man in black told him. D-Lock's jaw clenched. Then we gotta strike first. No, Snoop said, his voice low. We can't go wild. That's what they want, but we will find out who's behind this. We take this smart, like chess. Outside, storm clouds rolled in. Lightning flashed in the distance. The war had begun, and this time, it was in the shadows. Let's take a short pause. If you're listening to this story, tell us in the comments where you're from, and if you've ever experienced or witnessed anything similar in your life. Don't forget to subscribe to stay with us. Now, let's continue. It had been 3 days since the shooting. 3 days since Snoop Dogg's name filled the news tickers, the social feeds, the city whispers. Icon shot in hate-fueled attack. Was it a random act or a planned execution? The media spun in circles, hungry for headlines, blind to depth. But Snoop wasn't watching the news. He was watching the door. Room 816 had become a bunker, sterile, silent, guarded. Hospital security had tripled. No visitors allowed unless cleared. And still, the air felt wrong. Too still, too rehearsed, like someone was waiting for something. He barely slept. Each night brought flashes, the eyes behind the scope, the ringing in his ears, the way his leg folded under him as blood spilled into the street. On the fourth night, the door creaked open again, but it wasn't a nurse or a man in a suit. She was tall, mid-40s maybe, with skin like polished bronze and hair woven into tight, elegant braids. Her coat was navy blue, worn but clean. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and firm. I need 5 minutes. The guard hesitated, then nodded and stepped out. Something in her presence demanded trust. Snoop squinted. Who are you? My name's Marlene Coster, she said. I used to run intel for the DEA. I'm not here officially. Then why are you here? Because you've been marked, she said flatly. And if someone doesn't tell you the truth soon, you'll end up in a grave before the month's over. Snoop exhaled slowly. The Black Veil? She nodded. They're not just a hate group. They're a system inside the system. Ex-military, politicians, judges, executives, all white, all hidden. They erase people who rise too high. You were their next example. He looked away, eyes burning. They shot me in daylight, like it was nothing. They wanted it to be a message. Marlene sat down beside him, pulling a folder from her coat. Inside were photos, grainy surveillance stills, documents, names. One image froze Snoop's blood, a man in a sheriff's uniform, smiling beside the same symbol, a black veil over crossed daggers. That's Sheriff Langley, she said. He's one of them. You think you're safe in this hospital? He owns half the security contract. The walls felt like they were closing in. I worked cases against them for years. Marlene continued. They ruined my career, but I kept copies of everything, because I knew this day would come. Snoop leaned forward, voice sharp. Then help me. Expose them. Marlene met his eyes. I will, but it won't be easy. They'll bury the truth before they let it breathe. Then we dig, he said. Outside the window, rain began to fall. It started with a sound. At first, it was nothing, just a soft click near the air vent above Snoop's hospital bed. Then another, and another, rhythmic, intentional, too precise to be mechanical noise. Snoop opened his eyes slowly. The room was dim, early morning bleeding through half-closed blinds. He didn't move, just listened. Click. Pause. Click. Then silence. He reached for the call button. Nothing. No response. He pressed again. Nothing. This wasn't paranoia. Something was wrong. He swung his legs off the bed, wincing as pain shot through his bandaged thigh. Blood still soaked through the gauze from time to time. He moved slowly, carefully, using the four-pole for balance. The hallway outside was too quiet. Hospitals breathed with sound, monitors, footsteps, voices, but now it felt like the building was holding its breath. Then he saw it, a shadow turning a corner, too quick, too smooth, someone watching. He turned back into his room, locked the door, and grabbed the folder Marlene had left behind. Inside were photos, notes, names. One stuck out now more than ever: Dr. Grant Miles, head of trauma, former military, decorated surgeon, and a known associate of Sheriff Langley. Snoop's breathing sped up. His phone vibrated. Blocked number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice, distorted and cold. You should have stayed down. We don't warn twice. Click. He dropped the phone. His pulse thundered. They were in the building. A knock. Not on the door, but on the window. Room 816 was on the 6th floor. He froze, turned. There, barely visible through the glass, was the outline of a figure in a white coat, face hidden behind a surgical mask, staring from outside the building. Then it vanished. Snoop collapsed back into the chair, heart hammering. He was trapped, surrounded, hunted, and no one would believe him because the hospital itself was part of it. He picked up the folder again and saw a note tucked between the pages, one he hadn't noticed before, in Marlene's handwriting. If they come, don't run. Hide where even the light can't follow. Trust no one wearing white. The door handle turned. He slid the chair under the doorknob just as someone pushed from the outside. He whispered, breathless, "They're already here." Snoop sat in the dim light of his hospital room, the thick curtains drawn tightly. His leg, still in agonizing pain from the bullet wound, was propped up on pillows. But it wasn't the physical pain that gnawed at him anymore. It was the quiet, the suffocating silence that surrounded him like an invisible force. A constant reminder that danger wasn't just lurking outside his door, it was everywhere. He hadn't seen anyone since the mysterious visit from Marlene Coster, and yet, there was this presence, a sense that something was moving, shifting behind the scenes. It wasn't just the hospital staff anymore, it was everyone. Snoop's life had become a game of survival, where each breath he took was a calculated risk. But he was no longer just waiting. He had to move. He had to do something. The night had settled into an eerie calm when the door opened again. Snoop's heart raced, and he tensed up, instinctively reaching for the gun he had managed to smuggle in a few hours before. The woman who walked in wasn't a nurse or a doctor. She wasn't part of the hospital staff. She was tall, pale, with short, dark hair that looked like it had been cut too quickly, too unevenly. Her eyes locked with his immediately. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. "Who the hell are you?" Snoop growled, his voice barely above a whisper, but the venom in it was unmistakable. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. Her eyes were cold, calculating, but there was something else in them, something familiar. "I was sent," she said, her voice low and almost soothing, "by Marlene." Snoop's grip tightened around the gun. The woman raised her hands, palms open, showing she meant no harm. "I'm here to help, if you'll let me." Snoop narrowed his eyes, suspicion written all over his face. "How do I know I can trust you?" She didn't flinch. "You don't, but you don't have a choice." She pulled a small device from her pocket and placed it on the table. A recorder. She pressed play, and a voice echoed through the room, gravelly, deep, unmistakable. "Langley has made his move," the voice said. "It's too late to turn back now. They're in every level. Snoop, in the police, in the hospitals, in the damn government. They've got their hands in everything." The voice cut off abruptly. The room was filled with an oppressive silence that made Snoop's skin crawl. His heart beat harder now, adrenaline pulsing through his veins. "What's this about?" he demanded. "The Black Veil doesn't just want to destroy you, they want to control you. You're their biggest threat right now, and if they can't break you, they'll make an example out of you. They'll use everything at their disposal." Snoop stood, pacing. He felt trapped, like a lion in a cage. He was being hunted, but he was still alive, still breathing. "Who are they?" Snoop asked. "Who's behind all this?" The woman leaned forward. "The Black Veil is a network, a cult, but it's much more than that. They have the power to silence anyone who opposes them, and they have people everywhere. People you wouldn't expect, lawyers, businessmen, politicians, people who can make sure you never see the light of day again." Snoop stared at her, his mind spinning. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach twist. This wasn't just about a single shooting. This was about something far bigger, something dangerous, a war he never signed up for. "What do you want from me?" Snoop asked. The woman's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I want you to fight. We can bring them down, but we need your name, your influence. You're not just some rapper. You're a symbol. If we can expose them, we can change the system, but it has to be done from the inside." Snoop sat back down, his head spinning. Could he trust her? Was she just another cog in the machine? Or was she a key to something greater? "Let's do it," he said, voice steady. "But if you betray me, I'll take you down first." The woman nodded. "Understood. We'll move fast, but we have to be smart. They'll be watching you. They'll be watching everything." Snoop looked out the window, his thoughts heavy. He wasn't just a target anymore. He was the spark that could ignite a fire, and the fire would burn the system down. But the shadows had already begun to move, and in this game, no one was safe. Snoop didn't know how much longer he could hold on. The walls were closing in. Every shadow felt like it was watching him. Every creak in the floorboards like the slow tread of boots coming for him. The whispers in the hall, the cold breath of the night, they were closing in, suffocating the air around him. The worst part? He didn't know who to trust anymore. The woman, Clara, that's what she'd introduced herself as, had been gone for hours now, leaving him in the dark with only the hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights for company. But he couldn't relax. He couldn't afford to, not when the system itself was the enemy. Every move Snoop made felt calculated. Every glance, every turn of his head was deliberate. It was impossible to tell who was on his side and who had been sent to finish what the shooters had started. As the hours ticked by, Snoop began to feel something more sinister. They were coming. He could feel it deep in his bones, a sixth sense that had saved him countless times on the streets of L.A. He wasn't just paranoid, he was being hunted. But the worst part was the realization that it wasn't just random thugs. No, this was a game being played by powerful forces, a game where the stakes were his life and the lives of those he cared about. But there was no turning back now. The door creaked open, slowly this time, as though the person on the other side was testing the room, gauging his reaction. Snoop's eyes shot to the door immediately, his body tensing, fingers brushing the handle of the gun he'd hidden beneath the bed sheets. He was ready. And then it happened. The figure in the doorway wasn't a nurse, wasn't a doctor. It was a man, tall, with a sharp, angular face and eyes that gleamed with cold, calculated malice. He didn't speak at first, just stared at Snoop with a smug expression, like he was enjoying the fear in Snoop's eyes. Well, look who's still alive," the man said, his voice laced with venom. "I thought you would have learned your place by now. Dog, you're nothing but a pawn." Snoop's mind raced. A pawn? Who the hell was this guy? What did he want? "I've been keeping an eye on you for a long time," the man continued, stepping closer, his shoes clicking against the tile floor. "You've made things difficult, too difficult. The Black Veil doesn't like to be made to look weak." Snoop's heart skipped a beat. The Black Veil, the very name sent a chill through his spine. He'd heard whispers about them, but he never realized how deep their influence ran. "I don't know who the hell you are, but I'm not afraid of you," Snoop spat, his voice cold, the fear now turning into pure anger. He wasn't going to let this man intimidate him. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You should be. You're not in control anymore. You think you've been playing the game? No, you're just another piece on the board. And now, the Black Veil has decided it's time to end the game." Snoop lunged for the gun, but the man was too quick, grabbing Snoop by the arm and slamming him back onto the bed. The pain from his injured leg flared up, but Snoop gritted his teeth, refusing to show weakness. "You're a disgrace," the man hissed, his grip tightening. "A black man who made it big. You've been spitting in the face of everything we stand for." Snoop's eyes narrowed. He understood now. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything he represented, the threat of success, of defiance against a system built on control and power. He had become a symbol, not just for his fans, but for something much bigger, and the Black Veil would never allow that. The man's face twisted into a snarl, and for a moment, Snoop thought he was going to die right there in that hospital room. The room seemed to close in, the air thick with tension, the weight of the situation crushing his chest. But then, a knock. It wasn't the usual knock, soft and hesitant. This one was firm, insistent. Whoever was on the other side of that door had no fear. The man turned quickly, a look of irritation flashing across his face, but he didn't have time to react before the door slammed open. A new figure entered. "Clara, you should leave," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. but there was a steel to it that made the man pause. She didn't flinch when he turned his gaze on her. "I'm not going anywhere," the man sneered, but he didn't move. His eyes flicked to Snoop, then back to Clara. "And you should mind your place." Clara didn't respond. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. Before the man could make a move, she pressed a button, and suddenly, a loud buzzing sound filled the room. The man froze, confusion flickering in his eyes. The buzzing stopped as suddenly as it had started. "Now," Clara said, her voice sharp, "you'll leave, or you'll regret it." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Clara and Snoop. Before he let out a low growl and turned toward the door, he stopped just before leaving and shot one last, venomous look at Snoop. "You're not done," he warned. "The game's just begun." As the door slammed shut, Snoop collapsed back onto the bed, his heart racing. Clara stepped forward and locked the door behind her. "Are you all right?" Snoop just stared at her for a long moment, breathing heavily, trying to process everything that had just happened. "I don't know if I'm all right," he said finally, his voice hoarse, "but I know one thing. It's not over, not by a long shot." Let's pause for a moment. If this story is resonating with you, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever found yourself in a situation where danger was closer than you expected. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated. Now, we continue. The tension in Snoop's hospital room was palpable. Every second felt like a threat, every shadow a potential assassin. Clara's presence had provided a brief moment of relief, but it was fleeting. The walls were closing in again, and this time, it felt worse than before. Snoop knew this wasn't just about his life anymore, this was about a war being waged in the shadows, and he was its unwitting soldier. His leg throbbed with pain, but that was nothing compared to the gnawing fear in his chest. The black veil had made it clear, they were not going to stop until he was silenced, until his message was erased. They had been watching him for years, every move, every song, every performance. He was a symbol of defiance, and that was something they couldn't allow. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't afford to be trapped in this sterile, white-walled room any longer. The hospital, the bed, the floor drip, these were the trappings of a man who had been broken. But Snoop wasn't broken. He wasn't about to let them win. The door opened again, and this time, Snoop was ready. His fingers tightened around the gun beneath the sheets, and his eyes narrowed as the figure stepped into the room. He could feel the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. It was another man, tall, with a broad frame and a heavy gait. His eyes were steely and cold, his face hidden behind a thick beard, but it was his aura that made Snoop's blood run cold. This man exuded power, and he carried with him the quiet confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "Dog," the man said, his voice low and smooth. "You think you can escape this? You think you can just run?" Snoop didn't answer. He didn't need to. He wasn't planning on running. He was planning on fighting. The man stepped closer, his boots thudding heavily against the floor. "You don't understand what you're up against. You're not dealing with some random street gang. The black veil is everywhere. They have eyes, ears. There's nowhere you can go where we won't find you." Snoop's grip on the gun tightened. The black veil, these people, this organization, they were not to be underestimated. But Snoop had something they didn't have. He had resilience, and he had a platform, one that could shake the very foundation of their empire. "You don't scare me," Snoop said quietly, his voice steady despite the fire burning inside him. The man laughed, a dark, hollow sound. "You should be scared, dog. You have no idea what you're up against." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. Snoop's eyes flicked to it, immediately sensing danger. Before he could react, the man pressed a button, and the lights in the room flickered. The sound of a low hum filled the air, a signal that they were not alone. At that moment, the door burst open again, and two more men stepped in. This time, they were armed, their expressions cold and devoid of any mercy. They had come to finish what had started, and there was no way to stop them. Snoop's heart raced. His body was already fatigued from the trauma he had endured, but his spirit, his will to survive, was stronger than ever. He knew what he had to do. The first man moved toward him, his hand outstretched to grab Snoop. But Snoop was faster. With a sudden, violent motion, he pulled the gun from beneath the sheets and fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the room, and the man staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Snoop didn't wait. He didn't hesitate. He fired again, and then again, each shot landing with deadly accuracy. The two men who had entered behind him didn't have time to react. The room was chaos, a whirlwind of gunfire, adrenaline, and pain. But even in the midst of the madness, Snoop knew this was only the beginning. He had just killed 3 men, but the Black Veil wasn't going to let him walk away that easily. There were more of them, and they would stop at nothing to make sure he didn't live to see another day. The door slammed shut, and Snoop was left alone in the aftermath of the bloodshed. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling from the exertion and the shock of what had just happened. But through the fear, through the pain, there was one thought that kept him grounded, one thought that kept him going. I'm still here. I'm still standing. And that, more than anything, was what terrified the Black Veil the most. Snoop sat alone in the aftermath, the silence of the room now deafening. The world outside his hospital room felt far away, like a distant dream he could barely touch. Blood was still on his hands, literally and figuratively, but the adrenaline had already started to fade, leaving only the raw, gnawing pain of what was to come. It had been a blur, a whirlwind of gunshots, the staccato rhythm of survival. The Black Veil, this shadowy group who wanted to erase everything he stood for, had made their move, but they didn't know him. They didn't understand that when you back a man like Snoop Dogg into a corner, he doesn't surrender, he fights back, no matter the odds. But as the chaos of the moment began to ebb away, a creeping feeling of dread started to take root. The battle wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. Snoop wiped his face with his sleeve, staring blankly at the wall. His leg ached, the wound fresh and painful. But that wasn't what occupied his mind. What haunted him was the face of the man who had entered his room earlier, the one with the cold eyes, the one who had said that the Black Veil was everywhere. They were right. The Black Veil was everywhere. They were a shadowy force, hidden in plain sight, pulling strings, manipulating people, and destroying anyone who stood in their way. And now, Snoop was part of their target. The weight of it all felt like a crushing burden on his chest. His life had always been about more than just music. It had been about defiance, about breaking barriers, about standing up for what was right. But now, his defiance had become a war, and the enemy was closing in. He needed to leave the hospital. He needed to get out of here before they came back, before the Black Veil came back with more firepower, more men. But there was one problem. He was still recovering. His leg was a mess, and even though he felt the fire of determination burning inside him, his body betrayed him. It was still too weak, too vulnerable. The door creaked open again, and Clara stepped into the room. Her face was grave, her eyes scanning the room with a look of both concern and determination. She had been his ally through all of this, but even she couldn't hide the fear that flickered in her gaze. "You need to leave," Clara said without preamble. "It's not safe here anymore. They'll be back." Snoop looked up at her, his eyes tired but fierce. "Where do I go?" he asked hoarsely. His voice was thick with exhaustion, with the weight of what was happening around him. "Anywhere but here," she replied. "I've arranged for a safe house. It's the best we can do for now." He nodded slowly, not trusting his voice. He wanted to argue, to say that he wasn't going to run, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. He wasn't ready to face the Black Veil head-on, not yet, not in his condition, and Clara, for all her strength, couldn't protect him forever. He pushed himself to sit up, ignoring the shooting pain in his leg, and looked at Clara with a new resolve. "You're right," he said, "but this isn't over, not by a long shot. They came after me because of who I am, and I'm not going to let them win, no matter what it takes." Clara's face softened for a moment, but she didn't argue. She knew he wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. Snoop stood with her help, his legs unsteady, but his resolve stronger than ever. He had been through too much to just roll over and die. He had a purpose, and that purpose was bigger than the Black Veil. It was about survival. It was about sending a message that no one could silence him. The door clicked shut behind them as they left the room, and the hospital corridors seemed endless. The fluorescent lights flickered above them, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Every footstep echoed in the silence, a reminder that they were never truly alone. And somewhere, out there, the Black Veil was watching. Snoop didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. His focus was forward, on the fight that was just beginning. The safe house was nothing like what Snoop had imagined. It wasn't luxurious or glamorous. It wasn't meant to be. It was hidden, plain, and designed for one thing only: protection. As he stepped inside, the faint smell of dust and mildew hit him, but he didn't care. At least here, for the time being, he was out of the line of fire. He could feel the weight of the world bearing down on him as he took a seat in the dimly lit living room. Clara had managed to find him a place far off the grid, a place that would keep him hidden for as long as it took, but he knew this was only temporary. The Black Veil wasn't going to stop. They were organized, relentless, and patient. Snoop was certain that the attack at the hospital wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. He was a marked man. Clara went to the window, her eyes scanning the street outside as if waiting for something to happen. They were all just waiting for the next move, the next strike. Snoop could tell she was trying to stay calm, but he could see the flicker of worry in her eyes. "It's only a matter of time," she said quietly, almost as if talking to herself. Snoop didn't respond immediately. His mind was elsewhere, running through every possible scenario. They had attacked him once, but that had only been the beginning. If they came for him again, they wouldn't hesitate. They had shown no mercy, and they wouldn't start now. "I can't keep running," Snoop muttered, more to himself than to Clara. "This isn't me. I can't hide forever." Clara turned to face him, her face a mixture of frustration and understanding. "You don't have a choice. Not right now. You're too exposed." "But they're just going to keep coming," Snoop said, his voice rising. "I'm not going to be some coward who hides in the shadows. I've fought my entire life for what I have, for what I represent. I'm not going to let them take that away from me." He stood up abruptly, his fists clenched at his sides. Clara didn't say anything, but the worry in her eyes deepened. She knew the danger. She knew what the Black Veil was capable of. She knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Snoop paced back and forth in the small room, trying to push the pain in his leg out of his mind. His body was still healing, but his mind was racing, plotting his next move. He had been attacked in public, humiliated, shot at. That wasn't the end. It couldn't be. "We need a plan," he said, his voice sharp, determined. "I can't just sit here waiting for them to come and finish the job." Clara finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "You're not ready to face them. You need to rest, recover, regroup. If you go after them now, you're just asking to get killed." Snoop's gaze was unwavering as he locked eyes with her. He knew what she was saying was true, but something in him refused to accept it. He had spent too many years standing up for what was right, for his community, for the people who needed him. He wasn't going to stop now, not when the stakes were this high. "I'm not asking for permission," he said quietly. "I'm doing what I have to do." Clara didn't argue. She just looked at him, her expression resigned but understanding. "I'll help you, but you need to be smart about this." Snoop nodded slowly. He wasn't about to go into this battle unprepared, but he knew time was running out. He couldn't afford to wait. Every second spent hiding was a second the Black Veil was getting closer to their ultimate goal, destroying him and everything he represented. The sound of a car engine broke his thoughts, and he moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. A dark sedan was parked across the street, its headlights dimmed. For a moment, he felt his heart race in his chest, but it was just a momentary flare of paranoia. He couldn't let himself fall victim to fear. "I need to contact some people," Snoop said. "People who can help me fight back." Clara nodded. "I'll set up the connections. But Snoop, don't be reckless. We don't know who we can trust." Snoop turned away from the window, determination flooding through him once again. "I know who I can trust, and that's all that matters." The night stretched on, the air thick with tension. The world outside seemed quiet, but Snoop knew better. The storm was coming, and he would be ready. The night was colder than usual, not the kind of cold that bites the skin, but one that seeps into the bones, a silence that speaks of something imminent. Snoop stood on the rooftop of an abandoned building on the east side of Los Angeles, overlooking the city that had once lifted him up, and now had nearly buried him. He had chosen this place on purpose. It was here, decades ago, that he had recorded his first verses, beneath flickering street lamps and beside trash fires with nothing but hope in his lungs and rhythm in his blood. Now, it would be the place where he would face the very force trying to erase him from history. The Black Veil had made their final mistake. They underestimated a man who had nothing to lose. Clara sat in the van below, her fingers trembling slightly as she loaded the last weapon. She had warned him, pleaded with him, begged him to run. But Snoop had made his decision. No more hiding, no more fear. He wasn't fighting just for himself anymore. He was fighting for every black artist, every child told to keep their head down, every voice silenced in the dark. Tonight wasn't about survival. It was about truth and revenge. Let's take a brief pause here. If you're still with us, let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Has anything like this ever happened in your life or community? We'd love for you to share your story, and if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe to hear how this all ends. Now, we continue. The explosion was small, precise, a warning. Snoop barely flinched as the shockwave rolled over the rooftop. Below, figures began to move out of the shadows. 3 men, then 5, then a dozen, all dressed in black. No insignias, No words, just rifles, masks, and silence. The black veil had come in full force. But Snoop wasn't alone. From the other side of the building, two men emerged, friends from the old days, not gangsters, but survivors, artists, fighters, and like him, they had bled on these streets. Behind them came more, street poets, ex-veterans, teachers, activists, people the world had forgotten but who had never forgotten what it meant to stand for something. The standoff was unreal, like something from a war zone, but this war was personal. The first shot came from below. Clara screamed over the comms to get down, but Snoop was already moving, his instincts kicking in. Bullets shattered brick, concrete dust filled the air. He ducked, rolled, returned fire. They fought for hours. They fought through smoke, blood, screams. And when it was over, when the last masked figure had been dragged away in cuffs or silence, when the sun began to rise over the bloody skyline of Los Angeles, Snoop stood in the rubble, broken but unbowed. The black veil was dismantled. The names were revealed. Politicians, businessmen, even police officials had been part of it. The country was shaken. Investigations followed. Protests erupted. Streets were renamed. Statues fell. But most importantly, people woke up. And in that dawn light, with a torn jacket and bloodied fists, Snoop looked into a camera someone had left running and simply said, "I told y'all, we don't die, we multiply."